All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. The Reds just won their first series of the season. As of today, the Reds are still the only team to have beaten the San Francisco Giants this season. And even though a potential sweep in San Francisco that the Reds felt like they had within their grasp, even though that game got away, to me, looking at you, listening to you, it sounds like the glass is still half full over at the world headquarters of Charlie's Chalkboard.
What I took away from that series was the Reds offense still has plenty of flaws and plenty of questions and plenty of things that are unsettled and unanswered, and depth in the bullpen also remains a concern. But when you look at the upside of this year's team, what that series reminded me of was if the Reds ever, and it's still not a likelihood, but if they ever get to the playoff stage this year, when you have Greene and Lodolo starting a series, I mean, they can shut down a team. They can shut down an offense. I know the Giants aren't quite the Dodgers, but that's a good team. And I think Greene and Lodolo could hold their own pretty much against any lineup. That is exactly the type of 1-2 punch that you want to be building around. And they've been doing that whenever they've been healthy over the last 2 years.
Health is key, yes, but it's hard, as you said, not to let your head go there when you watch this Reds team roll out the 1-2 of Hunter Greene and Nick Lodolo. They both won in San Francisco, and they were outstanding, and that's a good thought. That's a good thing to think about down the road for the Reds when you look at how they can pitch and if that rotation holds together with good health and good defense behind them. Welcome into Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith, proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. Chaz, good to see you on the show this week. We'll continue that conversation. Hunter Greene pushes the ceiling even higher. You've got pitching coach Derek Johnson on that topic. Tales from the clubhouse and a post-game pie. I can't wait for that story. And as promised, this is big. This is a season debut. As promised, the first ever Power Stacks mailbag, your questions, our answers, all that on the show today. But let's do the leadoff spot with this. And this is where we started with the conversation off the top. MLB.com just released recently a starting pitcher power ranking, a top 5 for power rankings early in the season for starting pitchers. And the formula that they use, Charlie, it uses, obviously, the results so far this season, but also to a lesser extent, the performance of that pitcher from the last 365 days. So I'm taking a look at the list and considering those numbers, and I'll give you the top 4. Number 4, Cy Young winner Tarek Skubal. Impressive. Number 3, National League Rookie of the Year Paul Skeens, who had one rough start amongst his 3 starts so far this year. Number 2, Seattle's Logan Gilbert, who led baseball in innings pitched and whip last season for the Mariners. And could you guess that number 1 on the early season power rankings for starting pitchers in baseball is none other than Red starter Hunter Greene, who almost had the Maddox in his most recent start in San Francisco. When you account for the 3 starts this season that Greene has made, the track record he established last year, especially late in the year, post-All-Star game, your thoughts on Greene and where he is right now at 25 years old?
One, the Cy Young campaign is up and running, and if Greene stays healthy, he's going to be one of those 5-10 guys in the NL that are really in that picture. Also, I was thinking, Greene debuted in 2022. You've had 22, 23, 24, now 25. This isn't a college basketball podcast, but I know that every college basketball fan out there is like, man, I miss the days where we got to watch guys grow for 4 years.
4 years.
Stick around, and they become, you see them add this, and everyone talks about how much they miss the rewarding nature of that process. That's what we're seeing from Hunter Greene. And as I was, watching him on Monday, what I thought about was and it's been 4 years since I've been talking to Hunter about how much he wants a complete game and he didn't get it. But you go back to memories like that near no-hitter in Pittsburgh in 22. You look at all these different milestone moments along the way. You looked at, you think back to spring training starts where he's trying to figure out if he can trust his splitter. Like I remember him doing that one year at Goodyear Ballpark. And to see it all come together, I know he didn't get the big milestone, but to see it all continue to come together showed another reminder of how much he has grown. I asked pitching coach Derek Johnson, how much has Greene matured since 2022? And even more impressively, how much has his fastball matured since 2022?
I think first and foremost, I mean, you can talk about it metrically if you want to, and it's changing into a little bit more vert. But I think if you had to say one thing about it, I think he just believes in it way more.
That's funny. You'd think, I don't know, I believe in 100 and whatever mile an hour fastball. What has to happen to gain that confidence?
Well, I think he'd always been told that, that he had work to do with his fastball, and maybe his fastball got hit in the very short period of time that he was in the minor leagues. And, he got to the big leagues, and I think he had that, in his mind that it needed to be a better pitch. And for me, it was, maybe needing to locate it better, maybe learning how to understand how to use it better. But then I think another part of that was him just believing in the pitch and it being good. And really more so than anything, I've seen him kind of take that step where I believe that he believes.
How much was last year about he was able to reach back and throw his best fastball in the biggest moments? It felt like that was a big part of the season.
I think the last couple of years, there have been times where we've seen him do that no matter what pitch it is. Like when he needed to make a pitch and it was kind of a big spot in the game, it did seem like he was able to get there with it. And, to me, that's a sign of what a good pitcher is. A good pitcher kind of understands the moment and is able to execute. I think he did that more and more last year as the season went on.
And he can hit 90, or he can sit 97, 98, and then that can play very well. And then when he needs 100, he's got it.
Yeah, and it's always nice to have that little extra. Most guys, it's sort of the top end is the top end. It's hard for guys to save a little, and, he has the ability to do that.
And we had that conversation earlier in the season talking about Hunter Greene, but that described his start to a T. The pitch that I'll always remember from the start in San Francisco was, I believe it was the 6th, the fastball that he located 99 plus perfectly at the top left corner of the zone. I mean, that is just as good as it gets.
Yeah, and the word that stood out listening to DJ was belief. And that's simple. I mean, we all know that confidence is real. We all know that belief is real. Your point about, well, I would believe if I could just throw what he can throw, of course you believe. But it takes some time to get there. Listen, facing big league hitters, even for someone that has that naturally to a certain extent, velocity and power, you have to believe. And he clearly believes now. In his previous start, the one at Great American Ballpark against the Rangers, 30 pitches, 30 pitches and the whatever, 90, 85 that he threw were triple digits. I mean, and for a while last season, we talked about how he had dialed it back a little bit and only used the really heavy stuff when he needed it. But now I think he believes so much in maybe his other pitches that he's even letting the fastball go a little bit more than he has in previous times. But right now, through 3 starts, he's gotten deeper in each of those 3 games, progressively deeper in each of the 3 games. Strikeout to walk ratio through 3 starts, 23-3. Opponent's batting average, 139. Those are ace numbers. Yeah.
You have to bring this up too, because you were talking about the consistency, and like the day I got to spring training, I was like, man, Hunter Greene looks different this year. The work that he did athletically, I'm just talking about Hunter from a physical perspective. The work that he did athletically, the shape that he reported into, the focus that he put on sprinting during the off season. He's been running stadium steps. I think he added that in 2022 as one of the lessons of his rookie season. And now, like, you don't start running and then see it right away. Like, now he's all the way at the end of that progression where, like, he has aced the endurance, athleticism, consistency stuff that you need to be hitting 100 miles an hour in the 9th inning, which I think Greene was the 3rd guy since 2008 to do. So it's all these little things, like even even the sprints you run in November are required to lead up to a big start like Greene had on Monday.
Yeah, but you can see him right now. He can't wait until the next start. You can see it in between starts when you see him in the clubhouse, when you see him doing that extra work or that work in his routine on the field. There is a belief, but there is also what has always been there for Hunter Greene, and you've noticed this from day one, is there's such a focus. You can tell certain guys, a lot of guys are more loose between starts. A lot of guys, and it's not that he's not, but you can recognize focus when you see it. And I think you see that right now with Hunter Greene. And again, at 25 years old, who knows where the ceiling is or where he is this season in terms of taking another step. But through 3 starts, it's been amazing so far. So that's the one of the 1-2 punch. There have been times in the past when people have looked at the top starters the Reds have and have said, Lodolo, because he quote unquote pitches or seemed to have a grasp of that earlier than some young pitchers might have at the major league level. You think about the upside or the ceiling for him, and it looks tremendous. He still has that, but what have you seen through his 3 starts? Because health is always the key, and to have belief in yourself and your abilities, you have to believe that you can throw in good health and without pain, and he's battled that clearly through his first couple of seasons.
It's kind of the opposite of Hunter Greene. Hunter Greene had to learn how to pitch.
Hmm.
Lodolo knew how to pitch, but he had to learn how to let it rip. And just watching the way he's firing, specifically the sinker and the changeup in, with the confidence and the aggression leading to an efficiency that Lodolo has never had before. Like, similar to Greene, actually, do you think there's an intangible side to this too? Like, there were moments, in previous years where when Lodolo wasn't maybe at full strength, especially, where you could kind of see it, and you could see it in his body language. You could see it in, oh, it was a bad inning. And I'm kind of shrugging my shoulders here on YouTube if you can see it. But if you can't, you can kind of hear in my voice. Like, that's the space Lodolo was in. Man, now he's just on fire. Lodolo is as really more locked in than I've ever seen him. Listen, whenever he's been healthy, he's been pitching at a very high level. He's healthy. He's improved a lot of stuff off the field to help with the idea of him staying healthy. But then just the way he carries himself and feels on the mound, it's this I know I can beat you nature to him. That's what's been so fun to me to watch with Nick Lodolo this year.
And talking with Lodolo before one of his starts recently, we've seen this already play out. And he said, look, Derek Johnson stressed to us in the offseason, one of his big points stressing was to believe in your ability to pitch in the 6th inning, to pitch in the 7th and 8th innings. And we had last week the discussion of old school baseball. Is it real? Well, old school baseball, one of the foundations of that is that a starter shouldn't expect to go 5 or 6 innings, that a starter should expect to go deep every game and take on that responsibility and that feel of leading your team deep into a game. And it sounds like that's been a real focal point, not only with DJ, but with Terry Francona too.
And let me get more specific with Lodolo to exactly that point. Like, what Lodolo was all right, he moved pitches around early in counts, but his whole thing was, I'm going to get you to 2 strikes, and then I'm going to throw the perfect snapping breaking ball. We all know that pitch from Lodolo, the literal back foot breaking ball. And when it was on, I still think it's the best pitch on the team. But when it wasn't on, when the command wasn't there, things will get away from Lodolo. And he still has that back foot breaking ball. Actually, I don't even think he's throwing it all too well right now. And Lodolo's spoken about that. He's not even pitching his best right now and doing what he does best at his best, which is actually really encouraging. You consider what he's already accomplishing. But that's the key. He has other ways to beat you. Now, he had that one way to beat you. Now he's throwing changeups in 2 strike counts. Now he's using the breaking ball early in counts to set the fastball up at, say, the top of the zone later in counts. Like, there are all these other tools that Lodolo feels confident in tapping into. And that's a significant difference from an art of pitching, pitch calling, sequencing. Credit to Jose Trevino, too, for this another gear from Nick Lodolo.
All right, staying in the rotation, we keep waiting for news, preferably good news on the injury front for the Reds. And the first name to pop up in the hopper in that category is Andrew Abbott, who we knew was behind in spring training, was just going to be on a little bit later schedule, arriving to the Reds rotation. Where are we now with Abbott as he's expected to return to Great American Ballpark soon?
He'll return on Saturday, and it's another example. Like, The Reds are banking on this rotation being what carries the team. And as nice as Carson Spires looked, the Reds actually behind him didn't have any depth. We're very high on Chase Petty here on this podcast, but he's a 21-year-old who still needs some starts in AAA before they could tap on him. So one, to get Abbott back, bumping Spires to AAA gives you some depth you feel comfortable with. It adds additional upside that you have with Abbott. I actually think Abbott's looked great. And I know his last time out wasn't really lights out, but seeing him in his final spring training game and then in a simulated game that he threw the day before the start of the season, he's another guy who looks like Greene, more athletic, coming downhill better off the mound, more endurance to stay consistent. He has that zip on his fastball back that he lost. So Abbott's a big piece. His rotation spot was never in doubt. It was just wanting to be patient coming back from the injury. And yes, the Reds need to hit a lot more, but the one game where they weren't in recently was that Sunday game that Spires started. Abbott should give you a better start than that. It's probably a better pitcher than Spires right now. So, it is still a big boost, even though you'd like to have the bigger boosts, which you might be getting soon in the lineup as well.
Yeah, and there's always been a maturity about Abbott from the start, from day one when he got to Cincinnati. There's been a maturity beyond his years in terms of how he carries himself and how he handles pitching in those situations. So the return of Andrew Abbott, the first bit of good injury news, really good, that the Reds have had to start this season. All right, that's the leadoff spot. We're going to break throughout the show today to work in the first edition of the Power Stacks mailbag. I was overwhelmed with the response on X to the questions when we said, hey, fire some questions at us and we'll get to some of those. And I promised we would start with this one. The question came up, why does Geese call Charlie Chaz? And I thought about it for a little while. And if you know me, I call a lot of people by their last names. It's just something that kind of comes to me. John Sadak has never been John to me. He's just Sadak. That's Sadak. And it holds with other people too. Maybe some initials. But from the time that I got to know you, and then I started passing you in the hallway at Great American Ballpark or seeing you in the clubhouse, you always felt cooler than Charlie. No disrespect to your given name, Charles or Charlie, but you always felt cooler than that. But Goldsmith didn't really do it for me. And that didn't come out. And I just started coming and Chuck every now and then. I thought, okay, Chuck, that works too. But Chaz came out of my mouth one day and it felt right. And so I started calling you Chaz. Not all the time, but most of the time I call you Chaz. And that's how that came about. And it was interesting when we started this and I said, hey, I just, want to make sure I don't want to get into something and find out after the fact that I drive you crazy by calling you Chaz. And you said, no, that's cool. You said, but only one other person calls me Chaz. That other person is
Marty Brenneman.
Good company for Geese and the Hall of Famer to call you Chaz. So that's the answer.
Here's something I've told you as well, and might be more than you're bargaining for with this question. Whoever asked, one person on the planet calls me Char. It's someone who I got along with very well when he was here in Cincinnati. That would be Char. That would be Nick Senzel. Calls me Char. He'd say, "Hey Char, how you doing, Char?"
Listen, all we do when you have a name like mine, I answer to pretty much anything. So not that many people call me Brian. I've never really been Brian since about, 5th grade, but I answer to anything and whatever everybody's comfortable with, that's where I go. So I'm glad you're comfortable with it. It will mostly be Chaz for me. Question number 2. Once Austin Hayes is back, any chance they'll put Lux at third base? How do you see positions shifting and moving around? And we also got news that maybe Hayes is closer now, right?
The big question too. So yes, sorry. Hayes started his rehab assignment today. Maybe he gets a week worth of games, maybe even a little less. He's probably pretty close. But from a timing perspective, the question is, yes, when Hayes comes back, is McLean already back or is McLean not back yet? And I don't think there is an answer to that question with McLean on the IL with a slight hamstring strain. That is the first time during my time covering the Reds that the word slight has been used in an injury report. But, we'll see on McLean. But to answer this question, it's obvious. Are you filling one spot? Are you filling two? Hayes will play every day. I expect him to go back into the cleanup spot. If McLean is not back yet, I would expect probably maybe Fraley's role shifts back a bit. Well, I guess now you have Dunn as an everyday player. My apologies. So you take Dunn out for Hayes, but then when McLean comes back, then maybe Fraley's role shifts back a bit, as well as Jamer Candelario's. Those two guys seem to be the next. They're the guys who hit the next lowest in the order. Take that for what you will. So yeah, whoever comes back first, there's that spot that's bouncing around between kind of Dunn, Hurtubise, and Espinal right now. Hayes or McLean, whoever comes back first will drop right into that role. And then when the second guy comes back, that's where it gets a bit tougher because you have guys who have been playing more regularly. Fraley and Candelaria both. Fraley is playing better over the last, since we talked about him a few days ago. But let's see what happens over the next few days. Maybe even Will Benson. Let's see what happens over the next few days. It's a big week for again, SB, Fraley, Dunn, Benson, Hurtubise, and maybe even Candy, because they'll get the shot. But then when the guys come back, they're probably not going to get the next shot until someone else goes down. So those are kind of the guys to watch.
All right, that question takes us into the next set of questions or topics, really, in Charlie's notebook for this edition of the show. So inside the notebook, let's start with this. Some people obsess about the lineup every day, right? And that happens to a much lesser extent if you win and a team stays healthy. Not so much. Maybe you obsess about the lineup. But what do we know about Terry Francona right now and his lineup decisions or his philosophy on the lineup?
So I asked Francona on Sunday about why Espinal was hitting second, and he said he really likes the idea of keeping guys comfortable. And he said, now, does that comfort borderline on me being stubborn? Maybe. That's pretty much what Francona said. But he believes that you shouldn't shake up the lineup aggressively when you have day-to-day moving pieces. Like McLean gets scratched, don't rip up the whole lineup and write a brand new one. It's actually very interesting. When McLean got scratched, every coach and front office person was on the field except for Francona, who went into his office and came back out with a new lineup. You don't see that too much anymore. A manager kind of just going into his office, rewriting the lineup in an old school way, running it by the bench coaches on the field at the very end, and then submitting it. So it's Francona leading this process. Now, if McLean will be back on Tuesday, I could see Francona saying, all right, let's not shake things up just to shake them up again on Tuesday, keeping that placeholder number 2 spot. But if it's any longer than that, McLean, we've seen a lot of situations where the top of the Reds lineup has stalled out with an out from Friedel or Espinal early in a game. We've seen situations where those guys aren't getting on base, where there's not enough speed on base early in innings, where Elliott doesn't get a chance to showcase his speed because there are already outs in those innings. If McLean's injury lingers any longer, I could really see it being time to, all right, let's just move Elliott up to the 2 spot and reorganize things if McLean's out for a little bit. But if he's not, Francona has stressed he is going to be patient with his lineup construction. We're also seeing that, and we can talk about this if you want. We're also seeing that with who he's playing, sticking with certain guys.
Yeah. What's in what way? Go ahead.
Well, he's still playing Jake Fraley every day against righties. He's still, Candy got a day off the other day, but he's still playing Jamer Candelario. Francona, again, I think the biggest lesson I've learned from him is that patience really describes who he is. Now, can you disagree with managerial decisions that he's making? Of course. And, we won't dive into the specific examples, but certainly there's stuff that's been different. What's notable is that while Francona is such a patience guy, David Bell actually was one of the most aggressive in-game managers in baseball. Like, he would burn his bench in the 6th inning and pull the starter in the 5th, and he would try to win games in that segment of the game. Francona is very much, again, for better or for worse, playing the long game, keeping guys comfortable, keeping guys confident, not, again, tinkering in a way that would impact the day-to-day stuff, giving guys more of a runway to work through their struggles than maybe David Bell did. So we're learning that about Tito. Again, it's got to translate to wins. It hasn't translated to enough wins yet. The biggest talking point about the team right now is Francona's managerial decision. But again, just for background, that patience is a big part of who Francona is and what he believes in.
Yeah. No team this early in the season wants to start thinking about guys that the decision was to start them at AAA to start the season. You want to let those guys cook. You want to leave them there and let them have that experience But Will Benson and Noelvi Marte are up. Why are they up? What's the plan, and how do you think this all plays, and how Francona and the Reds feel about it?
So on Tuesday, when the moves happened, I wrote a 1,500-word newsletter about it. And then the more that I've thought about it over the last few days, it's actually 2 sentences. It was they had to call somebody up, and this is, Benson and Marte were playing great. They had to call somebody up, and Benson and Marte were hitting the best of the guys on the 40-man roster. Tangent, the guy's not on the Reds 40-man roster. I'm actually very concerned about the AAA depth beyond the guys on the 40-man roster, but that's a conversation for another day. Um, what's going to happen, and what is happening probably today and tomorrow morning, is Francona is going to sit down in his office like he did on Saturday. On Saturday when McLean got scratched with that story I was telling. He'll probably talk to the front office for different ideas and the coaches for different ideas. He's going to decide, all right, who's going to play this weekend, and if a guy gets hot and shows, if Benson, who probably won't start because they're facing 2 lefties, comes off the bench and looks great off the bench after a bad game on Wednesday, all right, then maybe Benson bumps himself up here a bit. But if, Francona is going to sit down this weekend and decide who is going to play over the next couple days and who fits where and how the roster where it's at stands and who's going to get that time, someone will have to be sent down on the position player side on Saturday for Abbott because they're heavy on position players now. Read between the lines who's not playing. Marte hasn't played yet. Maybe that's him being that move. But they needed guys who could hit. Francona will decide how these guys kind of re-rank as he's gotten another look at them. And most likely, I would expect, especially with Fraley hitting better, him to kind of stay the course with what he has been doing.
Good on Benson and Marte for, it is what it is, right? They're at AAA right now. They have to earn their way back. They have to have a spot. Good on them for getting off to a good start, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah, you get the sense you'd like to just let them breathe a little bit down there for a longer period of time than they have so far. Nick Martinez has been, as we circle back to the rotation, has been such an interesting thing to watch so far this season because he looks unhittable early in each of his starts. And in each of his starts, he's run into some hiccup. In the 6th inning, it happened in San Francisco in the most recent start. But the decision for him to be in that position and still out there in the 6th inning, you think that that's probably going to be a decision that's consistently made the way that it was in San Francisco, right?
One of the themes of this season is, again, patience, and then how that translates into the rotation is Francona is going to give more leeway to his starting pitchers than David Bell did. It's ironic, too, with Martinez. Last year, he couldn't get an out in the 1st inning. Now it's later in the games. The 1st inning thing ended up being a fluke. The Reds believe that Martinez is going to be just fine. There's going to be plenty of leeway and runway for all of these starters to pitch deep into games this season. It's not going to change. And, especially when you look at kind of the most under-discussed part of this Reds roster right now is Francona is showing very little confidence in the left-handed relievers on the roster. So that really pigeonholes what you can do in the middle of games in your bullpen. So it's Ian Jabot, or it's and Jabot has pitched nice, it's let's let one of your best pitchers pitch another inning. And that's what Francona's been doing.
Time to move on to the second set of listener or viewer questions. This one deals with health, which we've talked about. Feels like the Reds have injuries the past 10 years or so, more like an NFL team than a baseball team. Are they proportionately sending players to the injured list, or does it just seem that way because of a consistent lack of roster depth? They struggle to sustain losses. These are really tough. Injuries are injuries. Certainly, every front office examines things and examines the way that they're being trained, and they examine off-season programs, and they examine what to do and what not to do in spring training. Where are the Reds on answering some of the injury questions that they've had?
I like to tell the whole story here. Coming off 2022, the Reds made some major changes. On the medical side, they also put more front office attention specifically on the day-to-day stuff to make sure from a process-oriented standpoint, they were on top of things, and they are on top of things in general. There are some things you can avoid, some things you can't. Now, last year, a lot of their injury luck was just terrible luck. I think it was like 6 guys between the big leagues and AAA got hurt diving or running into the wall or getting hit by a pitch. You can't control that. What is different this year, and I'm not saying this is a concerning trend, but it is more concerning than running into a wall, is that Hayes calf, McLean hamstring, Diaz hamstring, Stevenson oblique are all soft tissue injuries. So that is different. Now that is combined with Francona patience. Let's get to it again. The Reds have been very patient in managing injury situations. McLean wanted to play. Diaz probably wants to be back out there right now. Hayes, the whole thing was just playing it safe. Abbott playing it safe. That ties in here as well. There's a lot of attention. There's a lot of conversation. It highlights the Reds' depth not being good enough. They have to do a better job in the international free agent market with the young kids in the middle rounds of the draft to have stronger waves that they can call up. But as a whole, the Reds have addressed the time and energy and effort to revamp their injury prevention team over the last 2 seasons.
Next question, and I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on this. Which Red is next in line for a long-term contract extension? McLean, De La Cruz, Lodolo. Of course, the first part of any answer is it takes two to tango. It takes two to make a deal. When you consider both sides and each player, where do you think this goes with some of the Reds' young stars?
I always like to say with extensions, there's no such thing as a close deal because circumstances can change very quickly. Like, 2023 conversations with Lodolo about an extension. I don't know how much deeper I'll go into that, but then Lodolo gets hurt, misses the season. So will things change? I do know that the Reds' overall approach is they'd like to get some things done. And there has been a lot of effort going on to retain the core, and that being a more sustainable plan to contending consistently over the long run than trying to replenish that core with another generation of prospects, which they'll add to it, but they're not going to replace it. They'd rather keep their guys instead of, try to sign another Mike Moustakas, Jay Candelario, Nick Castellanos, who was great, but of course was only here for 2 years. They'd like to work to keep this core together. Now, Ellie's in a tier of his own. And and I always say with Ellie, let's see what the next CBA looks like before we figure out what Ellie's future looks like. Of those two, I'd say McLean and Lodolo make the most sense. Steer, if he gets, fine again and start throwing again, he makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah. Boy, those are big questions for any team, and those are big questions. It's hard not to look down the road and think about, what's coming, but as your parents probably told you, just look at what's in front of you right now, enjoy what you have right now, plan for the future, but don't obsess about things that aren't here yet. Cross that bridge when you get to it. But the Reds, like you said, I think would like to maybe start walking and moving towards some of those bridges with some of those players that they already value and have here in Cincinnati. Tito's top 2, or sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 1. This is the category today in which the pizza story falls. So I'm going to sit back. This is kind of story time with Chaz. I'm going to sit back and enjoy the pizza story.
So I've been covering the Reds since the beginning of the 2021 season. And after the Reds lose the series finale in Milwaukee, I see, or more importantly, I smell something that I haven't. And, during my whole time covering the Reds, for the first time during my time covering the Reds, I saw a pizza in the cup. It wasn't just one pizza. There was a spread of delicious, unbelievably smelling pizzas. And of course, there were other more nutritious options for, in the kitchen cafeteria, that the players were dining on as well. But then they'd also go in and grab a slice. And I do love that idea that, yes, the Reds have a full-time nutritionist. From an injury side, they take the nutrition, they put as much attention to detail on the nutrition side as any team in the league, it sounds like. But Francona comes in and he understands, you know what? Every now and then, the best move a manager can make is getting a pizza in the clubhouse. And that's kind of a beautiful thing that Terry Francona did. It's sometimes all we need are our orange slices or our pizza. There's something very little league about it, in the best possible way. The reminder of, at the end of the day, let's take a deep breath. Let's enjoy a slice in each other's company. And let's get on a flight to San Francisco. And the Reds did that, and then they won 2 games. Thank you. And I really mean this. One of the best smelling pizzas I've ever encountered.
Did you get a look? Was it New York, Detroit, extra crispy, thin St. Louis crust? Did you have a feel for the type of pie that it was?
Now, obviously, it was if I were the whole reporting thing is you got to get the specific pizza. I did fail in this aspect. I do not have the specific pizza for you. I would assume it was a Milwaukee staple, local thing. It looked to me like kind of like a Dewey's consistency, like
Yep.
a doughier, solid crust, not thin. The key clearly was the sauce. The sauce seemed to be pretty special, and then some solid but not overwhelming cheese on top of that.
That's still solid reporting. Your senses were rewarded post game, and that's solid stuff. I like that a lot. Back to the questions now. Our final two questions for this episode of the show, and you brought this up earlier. You had a couple of shows ago an interview with Spencer Steer that, to me, was one of the most. It was a heavy interview, I thought, with a guy that we've all seen do some amazing things and grow, and it sounded. You could hear the frustration in Spencer Steer's voice about the injury in his shoulder and the fact that he's still just hitting and not playing in the field. He wants to be out there and do more than be an everyday DH. Right now, he can't. The shoulder has prevented that, but as they're trying to get him back to that point, he's on a throwing program, which you pointed out has been overseen by Reds pitching coach Derek Johnson. But he said, Spencer Steer, I'm having to learn to throw all over again and train my body to do a few different things. And my body isn't always cooperating with that. So that was a little while ago. What's the latest on Steer? As the question says, his throwing program, how is he progressing?
Well, first he's feeling better and he's having more confidence and trust in his shoulder, and we're seeing that at the plate. But from a throwing progression standpoint, I show up to the ballpark pretty early every day, and it's some of the earliest work that I've ever seen. Spencer's out there at like 2:00 for a 7:00 game with Freddie Benavidez, with Colin Cowgill, with the trainer, and usually Derek Johnson as well. He'll throw from about 20 feet out with Colin, and he's not letting him rip. He's going through a specific set of drills, like he does a thing, and I'll mimic this on YouTube. We've all done this drill playing baseball, where you keep your feet stationary and you do your rotating kind of while keeping your feet square, and then firing from there to work on his mechanics. He'll do some throws without a glove. He'll probably do that. All of it takes probably 10 to 15 minutes. Again, he's not zipping them in there. He's not stepping back. He's still pretty much in the same range, I would guess 30 feet, that he's been working on all along. And then he'll end up doing defense work at first base, and then he'll shag some fly balls over the course of the day. So he's keeping himself fresh, getting reps at other positions. Obviously not from a throwing standpoint, but there's more time and work that will need to be done before he's really letting it rip.
Final question for today. Prospect alert. A question about one of the Reds' top prospects. Their first pick in the most recent draft, Chase Burns, got off to a good start. He's in Dayton, right? Where do you see, we saw Rhett Lauder ascend quickly, very quickly. What kind of path do you think the Reds have in mind for Chase Burns?
So first of all, just watching Burns, even in spring training, I was like, except for Hunter Greene, I've never seen a pitcher move like this. And the stuff speaks for itself. I mean, he, like everyone, like Francona, I know, the Reds front office saw what he did in his Dayton debut and was like, wow. He'll move very quickly. Now, Lauer wouldn't have even debuted last year if it weren't for the injuries. Right. So it's impossible to say whether or not Burns is going to debut, because if the starting five stays healthy, I don't see him beating out Andrew Abbott in September, let's say. Now, is there a scenario where Chase Burns is pitching out of the bullpen in September? That's something that's on my radar. And I'll tie that into one more point. I talked about concerns about the depth of the bullpen and the need for some more there. To me, from a roster standpoint, or not from a roster standpoint, from an organizational depth chart standpoint, the most interesting story of the Red season to me is the arms in AAA plus Chase Burns. That could potentially make an impact in high leverage innings down the stretch this season. That's Luis May. That's Zach Maxwell, who's my personal favorite of the group. That's Lyon Richardson, who had a fantastic spring after a rough 2024. And then that could be Burns factoring in as well. They have some real power arms. And not just that. I mean, these guys have that chip on their shoulder that Graham Ashcraft chip on their shoulder where they'll just
Swagger.
let it exactly. They'll just let it rip. And there is a real world where some of those guys are really helping out the Reds bullpen down the stretch at some point this season. Again, Burns is the longest shot. Obviously, he's a starter in high A, not a reliever in triple A. And the Reds will always make sure they do right by the prospect to not take anything away from what he could do for future seasons. But because Burns has thrown a lot of innings in the past, he could sustain over the course of the year. And I mean, he does have some of the best stuff in the organization. So that's something that's definitely on my radar.
I feel a future segment coming with Charlie's depth charts because we know you have a spreadsheet and some complicated Excel document for all these things. So that's coming, right?
I mean, it's not a complicated spreadsheet. It's just color coded. Orange and blue and red aren't necessarily complications. I got those down.
That's good. I appreciate the organization. So yeah, we'll do that soon. That's going to be fun. But first off, the questions were great. Like I said, the response was awesome. We'll do this again. So we hope if you're listening right now, keep that in mind. We'll throw the invitation out from time to time for questions. Keep those coming or suggestions, something you'd like to see or hear, or something you'd like to see us do on the show from time to time. We are monitoring feedback and we are anxiously awaiting feedback one way or the other. So get that to us when you can. Reds are coming back home after San Francisco. The homestand, you see Pittsburgh and Seattle starting with the Pirates. Each of these teams, the Pirates included, have gotten off to a similar start in terms of results of the Reds. The first question that anybody will ask about the Pirates is, are the Reds going to see Paul Skeens? No, they won't. He gave up a career-high 5 runs in St. Louis in his last start, so they won't see him. What do you expect out of this Buccos team?
I think the key to the series is that the Reds are missing maybe their 3 best hitters against left-handed pitching, Hayes, McLean, Stevenson, and they're going to be facing 2 left-handers to start the series. So with, 14 guys on the 14 position players to pull from right now, is Friday the day that, all right, maybe Marte does get a chance? Could this be a big opportunity for Blake Dunn? Like we were talking about earlier to show, yes, I belong in a role, or maybe it's more of a grind and you reassess not his spot on the roster, but his role when a guy like Hayes comes back. Same thing with Espinal. Gavin Lux against left-handed pitching. Like, he could get that chance now. He probably won't get that chance when the team's back at full strength as much. So it is kind of a big weekend for all those guys to show what they can do versus a lefty. Because the Reds kind of would like another guy to emerge, and the injuries do create an opportunity now. I'm worried about this offense against left-handed pitching, and that factors into this too, because neither of these guys are great. So you got to be able to hit them with whoever you've got.
And for the Pittsburgh series, you have Singer, Abbott, and Greene. Is that correct?
I think that sounds right. That sounds right. Singer's turn on Friday, Greene on Sunday, and Abbott on Saturday. That is right.
There you go. So the debut of Andrew Abbott against the Pirates this weekend at Great American Ballpark. And with that, we shall say, please, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever, check us out there. We're on YouTube as well. Be sure to leave a rating if you're so inclined, and just like and subscribe, because Power Stacks is just getting going, right?
And I'll always say, tell your friends, just as important.
Tell your friends. And speaking of my friend Chaz, for our producer and fellow Texan, Kent Garrison, I'm Brian Giesenslaw. Thanks for listening or watching. We'll see you next time.